Alright. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. We start today on hadith number 143, at least in my book, Babu Mashir Ra'si Kulleh, the chapter about wiping one's head entirely, the entirety of the head. عن عبد الله بن زيد رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قال له رجل أتستطيع أن تريني كيف كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتوضأ. So an individual asked Abdullah ibn Zayd to show him how the Prophet ﷺ used to perform wudu. Now, the rest of the hadith is the entirety of wudu, but where this hadith, or at least where Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala wants us to focus on when it comes to this particular hadith, is the description of the Prophet ﷺ wiping of the head. So, قال فدعا بماء فأفرغ على يده ثم غسلها مرتين ثم تمضأ واستنشق ثلاثا ثم غسل وجهه ثلاثا ثم غسل يديه مرتين إلى المرفقين ثم مسح رأسه بيديه فأقبل بهما وأدبر بدأ بمقدم رأسه حتى ذهب بهما إلى قفاه ثم ردهما إلى المكان الذي بدأ منه ثم غسل رجليه. So just what we've gone over before in terms of the actions of wudu, what is to be washed. And here it says that when he washed his hands at the beginning, he washed them twice. Okay? And then he performed the madmada and istinshaq, the washing of the mouth and the nose, 3 times. And then he washed his face 3 times. And then he washed his arms twice each. Okay? So, what am I pointing out here? Or what's being pointed out here? It's sometimes he's doing 2, sometimes he's doing 3. Okay, what do we know is the sunnah? 3 for it all, with the exception of the head, right? Wiping the head. And we went over already hadith where the Prophet was observed washing each part once and washing each part twice, right? He did all of them the same number. Here we're getting another variation, and that is you don't have to be consistent in the amount of times you wash each one, right? If you do your face once, it doesn't mean you have to do everything else once, right? Where can this be useful? Let's say you're making wudu, you wash your face once, and then you continue, you forgot, I forgot to do it 3 times, I only did it once. And then you might start asking, okay, well, do I have to do the rest once? The answer is no, you can complete it, right? So remember, the 3, washing 3 times, is a sunnah, right? It's not an obligation. If you do it once, then that's the bare minimum. But of course, we don't want to downplay the reward behind doing it a few extra times. Right. And then he says that he wiped his head. And here, again, the point of this particular hadith, at least in terms of the chapter titling, is that this hadith provides more clarity in terms of how to perform wiping the head. So it says that he began at the front of his head and went back to the back of his head and then went back forward, right? This is 1 wipe. It's not 2, it's 1, all right? And we already mentioned that the head begins where the hairline is normally there, right? For women, I don't think you have to worry about it as much, but for men, right? A lot of men, their hairline recedes, right? They might be bald over here, or they might be bald entirely. So, okay, where do I start? It's where the hairline normally is, right? That's where you start. And then you like this with your hand, you go all the way back, right? To where the hair normally ends. Under the hair, okay, I'll get to that in a second if you have long hair, right? So to where the hairline normally ends, and then after the hairline ends, that's where the neck starts. Now, I know that some have said that you wash your neck. I think there's some statements in Hanafi school, I don't know if that's their primary opinion. And again, in my limited research in terms of those who said you wash your neck as well, they said min bab al-ihtiyat. It's like just in case. No, that's not the way ibadah works. We don't do just in case in ibadah. No, we say if there is no clear evidence, just in case, we don't do it. That's a just in case. You don't do it. Because remember, the purpose of ibadah, the primary essence of worshipping Allah is submission. We do because He said. And if we don't do, it's because He didn't say, or He told us not to do, right? So it ends at the hairline, where the hairline ends, right? Back, forward. That is the entirety of the sunnah. What is the bare minimum? Scholars differ. Here you have, each school has a different opinion, right? Some schools say it has to be the entirety of the head, at least once, going back, right? So going forward after going back, by unanimous consent, this is a sunnah. This part is not obligatory, it's a sunnah, right? But how much of the head needs to be wiped? Some scholars said all of it. Other scholars said more than 50% of it. Some scholars said a third or a fourth, like the Hanafis, right? Some scholars said, like the Shafi'is, 3 strands of hair need to get wet. And that's it, right? So if you do this, you're good in terms of Shafi'i school, which is very useful because if you're a hijabi lady and you need to make wudu in public, you don't want to take your hijab off, or maybe you're somewhere where you're wearing hijab, you don't have to take it all off and wipe your head. All you have to do is do this, right? So that's in terms of minimum. Now, I'm sorry? Can you mix and match schools? I mean, how are you going to mix and match something like this? Oh, well, what I would say is if you normally follow the opinion that you have to wipe the entirety of the head and you're wearing hijab, you can just wipe on the hijab, right? Yes. The Prophet ﷺ, if he would wear the turban, remember the Arab turban, when they really wear it, I mean, they wrap it all around their head. It goes down here. They wrap it around their neck to minimize, sun exposure. That's how they do it. And so there's an authentic hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was observed wiping on his imama, on his turban for wudu. Right? And the scholars said the same thing applies for hijab. Right? So if a lady's wearing hijab and she has already made wudu prior to putting on the hijab, right, she can wipe on the hijab. Yeah. So if you follow the opinion where it has to be the entirety of your head, then you can just wipe on your hijab. Right? But if you're following Shafi'i or Hanafi, you can just easily put your hand in and wipe.
So if you're wiping on hijab, it's not soaking wet?
Mm-mm.
No.
Wipe is different than wash.
So you just wet your hand?
You wipe your hand. It's the same way you wipe your socks.
That means to wet the thing?
No. When you wipe your socks, do your socks get wet?
Depends.
It depends on what?
What kind of socks? I want your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes,
All right. Next, Bab Isti'mal Fadli Wudu Nas. Chapter about using water that was already used by others for the sake of wudu.
Sorry, before you move on. Is there anything about wiping your ears?
Yeah, so it is a sunnah to wipe the ears, right? Once. So you do the head, and with the same water, you wipe your ears. Inside and out. But it's not an obligation. Again, you can reach under, you can put under your hijab. Yeah. If you want to do if you want to wipe your ears while wearing hijab, you want to get that sunnah, then you just put your fingers in. You can't do it outside. Yes, as far as I know.
So there's an obligation, the ears?
The opinion I follow, no, it's not an obligation.
But it's the sunnah.
Yes. Yeah, you could wipe your head with one hand, no problem.
Well, I stopped washing my neck way back in the winter time. You said it's.
Yeah.
I said thank you so much.
Spared you, right?
No, I don't miss it, especially in the winter time.
Okay.
All right, continuing. So the next chapter is about, ladies, the next chapter is about using water that has already been used by somebody to perform their wudu. Can you make wudu with it? So, عن أبي جحيفة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال خرج علينا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بالهاجرة فأتي بوضوء فتوضأ فجعل الناس يأخذون من فضل وضوئه فيتمسحون به فصلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الظهر ركعتين والعصر ركعتين وبين يديه عنزة. Okay, so Prophet ﷺ, they were traveling. Hajira is just a place, a geographical location in Arabia. I don't know exactly where, but they were traveling. So water was given to the Prophet ﷺ so he can perform wudu. And what remained from his wudu, the Sahaba went and they started to wash themselves with it. I already explained this to you all last time, but just to refresh our memories, and that is the companions' enthusiasm about the remains and the residue of the Prophet ﷺ. The way I've come to understand it is that they didn't find barakah in the things itself, but rather the barakah that they were pursuing was their love for the Prophet ﷺ. They loved him so much that they just wanted anything that comes from him with them, right? So this wasn't their heart was attached to the thing or to the Prophet ﷺ, but rather in their heart's attachment to Allah, they do what they know Allah loves, and what Allah loves is Rasulullah. And in their love of Allah, they love the one Allah loves, and they follow the one Allah has commanded them to follow, right? So their love for the Prophet ﷺ, their obedience to the Prophet ﷺ wasn't for the sake of the Prophet. It was an extension of their love and obedience to Allah. And therefore, when they would take something of the Prophet and keep it with them and revere it, it was in hopes that they are showing Allah that they love the one He loves, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So their heart remained attached to Allah, not to these things. Right? And go back to the previous session if you want more of an explanation.
الهاجرة is a time, it's not a place. الهاجرة الوقت بعد زوال الشمس. الظهر يعني that's why.
Okay, so al-hajira is a time, not a location. Right, what time is it? After Asr? So after afternoon, basically what we would say, translate it as.
So should the water that they are taking, it's not the water that falls down after a certain vessel?
No, it is.
Or
That
is
and
it from the same vessel that you use?
it could be both.
It could be both. It
Yes.
could also be like you washed
It is
both.
it's both, because we have another hadith where somebody from Quraysh observed the companions, said they would rush to take the droplets from the Prophet ﷺ's wudu, right? So you have that, and then the Prophet ﷺ prayed Dhuhr 2 rak'ahs and prayed Asr 2 rak'ahs, and in front of him was a anaza, which is a type of sheep, right? A category of sheep. So I'm guessing that once we get to the chapter about Salah, we'll go over the shortening of prayers and whatnot. So we can save that for there, as well as praying, putting something in front of you if you're praying, right, as a sutra, as a barrier. Right? So we'll wait until that we come across that in the chapter about Salah. But what I'll say here is the following: why is this being brought up? Like, okay, well, making wudu from the wudu of somebody, from the water of somebody else's wudu. The reason is that in some schools, like the Shafi'i school and the Hanbali school, you cannot use the water that was used to perform wudu. That's how they see it. Their reasoning is that by using it to remove spiritual impurity, it kind of figuratively impurifies the water itself, right? That's not the opinion that I follow. The Hanafis and the Malikis, if I'm not forgetting, they don't follow this opinion. Right? Water is water, and it doesn't change simply because somebody uses it for wudu. Water changes when it mixes with things that either remove it from being called water, or it's an impurity that impurifies, like it's a tangible impurity that impurifies the water. These are the two types of water that we cannot use for wudu, right? But just simply because somebody else used water or made wudu from a source of water does not invalidate it for somebody else. عن السائب بن زيد بن يزيد رضي الله تعالى عنه قال ذهبت بي خالتي إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالت يا رسول الله إن ابن أختي وقع فمسح رأسي ودعا لي بالبركة ثم توضأ فشربت من وضوئه فقمت خلف ظهره فنظرت إلى خاتم النبوة بين كتفيه مثل رز الحجلة. Right, so we have a few words here that I'm not familiar with, so we'll see what we can come out with. So Sa'ib radiallahu ta'ala an says that his maternal aunt took him to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and told the Prophet, you know, this my nephew is waqi'un. I don't know what that means.
He faints a lot.
Hmm?
He faints a lot.
He faints a lot. He has some sort of medical condition, it seems like. Whether that's a physical disability or a physical abnormality, or he faints, whatever it is, he has some sort of condition. So the Prophet ﷺ wiped his head and made dua for him that Allah puts barakah in his life. And then the Prophet ﷺ made wudu, and this young man drank from the wudu of the Prophet ﷺ. And he says that he saw the seal of prophethood between his shoulders, and like a grain of rice or something like that. Like a button. Right? So it was probably this size, something like this. So we have a few things here, right? The fact that the Prophet wiped his head and made dua for him. There's nothing strange here. The Prophet is making dua for him. But what did he make dua for him for? He didn't say, may Allah cure you of this. He said, may Allah put barakah in your life. And this isn't a unique incident or a unique situation. Rather, you have another situation where a lady who used to clean the masjid, she would have, what's the term? She had schizophrenia. She had some sort of condition where she would lose her she would lose her faculty. Like, she'd just go crazy. I forgot what the psychological term is or condition is, but she would have this, and when she would do that, she would rip her clothing, right, exposing some of her body parts.
Like a seizure.
I don't know if seizures, but seizures you lose like all ability to. I don't think it's as severe as seizures, because she would still function, right, but she would lose her ability to rationalize what she did, right? What is it? She loses her cognitive ability, right? Sure. So she goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, Ya Rasulullah, make dua that this goes away. And he tells her, I can make dua for you in this regard, or I'll give you another option, that you be patient with it and you get Jannah. Right? She said, Ya Rasulullah, I want the second option. I'll be patient with it for Jannah, but at least make dua that I don't rip my clothing and expose myself. So the Prophet made dua for her for that. Why? Why is that the case, right? If a parent comes to me and says, my child has this condition, make dua that he gets shifa, what would be expected of me? Make dua for what? For shifa, right? And if I didn't do that, I said, okay, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him hidayah. It's kind of like, that's not what I asked for, right? So what's the deal here? Well, the Prophet ﷺ, what was his mission? When it comes to his relationship to another human being, what is his, right? To Jannah. That is his rahmah to them. I'm getting you to paradise, right? And therefore his mindset was always afterworldly, akhirah. What is your situation in the akhirah? That's how he saw it. So if a person had a condition that they had to struggle for as a result, then in the Prophet's mind, that meant what for that person in terms of their akhirah? a lot more reward, right? Not necessarily they're guaranteed paradise, but it certainly helps their chances, right? So that's one. Number two, what if the person is cured and as a result of being like everybody else, they deviate? Okay? Now, somebody's going to come and say, well, what if as a result of that they become a better Muslim? Both is true, right? But that's not the point I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make here is, in the Prophet's mind, it's not a healthy Muslim isn't one who has, like, they're perfectly normal. Rather, a healthy Muslim is somebody who has barakah in their life. They have hidayah in their life. That is more important. So somebody who is perfectly normal but has no barakah, in comparison to somebody who is struggling with a situation but has barakah in their life, who's better off? The other one, right? Easy said. It's easy for me to sit here and say this, right? But the idea is, why didn't the Prophet just make the dua that would resolve the situation at hand? The answer is perception. What's more important in a person's life isn't their physical condition. What's more important is the presence of barakah. If barakah is present, then that person will be just fine, even with the condition. Right? So you have people who are completely handicapped, but they always have a smile on their face. And people who have everything you can ever imagine, and they're always frowning. Who's better off, honestly? Right? The first one. So the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't ignore the request, he upgraded it to something better. If the barakah for this person comes in the form of their shifa, then by making dua for their barakah, the shifa will come. But if the barakah is going to come from somewhere else, then it's different, right? And again, for somebody who may not be tested with severe circumstances, it's easy for me to preach, right? So I don't want to sound insensitive or, it's all easy and whatnot. It's not. But perhaps a perception can help. And perhaps the situation a person finds him or herself in is the door of barakah for that individual, right?
Maybe convulsion was the word?
No, it's not convulsion.
Was that it?
Anyway, whatever it was, right? Now, the Prophet ﷺ making wudu and then the child drinking from that wudu, people will come and say, see, tabarruk bin Nabi. Getting barakah from the Prophet ﷺ. Again, I'm not denying that there's barakah that comes from the Prophet ﷺ. But notice something here. There's nothing here that says that the child was cured. Right? That's one. Could he have been? Yes. Right? But there's nothing here that clearly indicates that. That's number one. Number two, why did he do it? Right? Did he do it because it's a means, or did he do it because it's an end? Like the point, did he do it because the point is to get barakah, to do something? How do I word this? Is this simply a means to getting something from Allah? Or is the point here to end with the Prophet ﷺ? You see the difference? I keep going back to this. The Prophet ﷺ did not come for our hearts to be attached to him. The Prophet ﷺ makes this clear, and Allah makes it clear. قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. I am a human being like you. What differentiates me from you, yuha ilayya, Allah gives me revelation to worship Him. My role is to get your heart connected to Him. And although the Prophet ﷺ obviously plays a central role in this process, what is that role? That role is for us to have a visual manifestation of Allah's relationship to us and the Quran itself. The Quran being Allah's words, we see how the Quran plays out in the life of the Prophet, in the behaviors of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's why if you want to know the Quran, you have to know the Prophet. The Prophet, his statements and his actions are tafsir, an explanation of the Quran, right? And therefore, if somebody does not know a single verse in the Quran, but emulates the actions of the Prophet, what are we going to say this person is in terms of their application of the Quran? Precise. But somebody who has studied every single book of tafsir, but knows nothing of the Prophet ﷺ and pays no attention to emulating the Prophet, then their application of the Quran is going to be limited, right? And also in terms of the Prophet, how the Prophet engaged humanity is a reflection of how Allah engages humanity. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ says, the most despised people to Allah is the one who kills a prophet or the one who a prophet kills. Because that is a reflection of Allah's anger. If a prophet whose heart is bursting with mercy feels the need to kill someone, you have to ask the question, how evil is that person? How evil are they? Incredibly evil. Right? Allah Ta'ala alam. All right. Bab wudu' al-rajuli ma'a imra'atihi. Oh, this gets fun now. The chapter about a man making wudu with his wife. Right? So now they say, do activities together, husband and wife activities. Here you can do husband and wife activities, but making wudu with one another. Right? عن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال كان الرجال والنساء يتوضؤون في زمان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم جميعا. Okay. Here Ibn Umar رضي الله تعالى عنه says that people, men and women, used to make wudu during the time of the Prophet ﷺ together. Okay. Now some people are going to be, not you all, some people say, see, co-ed. What's wrong with boys and girls playing sports together? See, they used to make wudu together. What's wrong with men and women praying side by side? They do it in Mecca, which is not true. Right?
No, it's not true.
They're not intermixed. You might find sections where the men and women are parallel,
I did in Hajj.
where it's man, woman, man, woman, man, woman.
Yes. I did my first Umrah 27 years ago. And we all were mixed.
That was the time where they weren't really organized. Now,
Yes. So that's what I'm saying.
anyway, that would be considered an exception due to the mass amount of people,
Okay.
right? Or else in every single other masjid, including the Mecca, right now, you might find areas where they might be men here, women here, but to say that they're completely mixed, that doesn't happen, right?
I did my Hajj the same way.
Again, that must have been
Long time ago.
not just a long time ago, it must have been a very isolated exception, right? That you just kind of frantically, they just started praying because prayer started.
Yeah.
Right? This isn't organized by the organizers.
Yeah, we arrived
You know what I mean?
and it was Fajr time and they said, do your wudu and make Fajr. So when I got to the spot, there was a man in front of me, behind me, on my left, on my right. I was like, how am I supposed, but I had to do the Fajr, but that was not like the norm, like
Mm-hmm.
just, yeah, I was so uncomfortable with that.
So
Right.
basically it was under unusual circumstances.
Unusual circumstance, right? And on top of that, it's not that the organizers of Hajj are saying this is okay, go ahead and do it,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so what's the deal here? Well, the verses for hijab and what we would call gender boundaries came down in Surah An-Nur and Surah Al-Ahzab, right? The 24th chapter and the 33rd chapter. Ahzab, you're talking more about the 6th year, 5th year after Hijrah. So the Prophet ﷺ has already been around for nearly 2 decades. approaching 2 decades. We assume Ayat al-Nur or Surah al-Nur came down around a similar time, right? So you're talking about nearly 2 decades before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to set clear gender boundaries. Now, Salah was made obligatory when? Much earlier. Salah was obligatory from almost day one, right? It was Fajr and Asr prayer that were an obligation, just Fajr and Asr. And then it slowly became the 5 daily prayers. And Tahajjud. The early Muslims, they had to pray Tahajjud, according to one opinion, right? So, that being said, they would make wudu next to each other before hijab was revealed, right? Before the hijab was revealed, before the gender boundaries were put in place. Obviously, when the gender boundaries are put in place, now you would assume naturally that they're going to start separating, right? Why? Because, well, part of wudu is the arms, which is awrah for a woman, right? She can't expose that to other men. Men shouldn't look at that, etc., right? So that's one. Now, what does this have to do with the title of the chapter? Oh, it's saying that had it been inappropriate for male-female, forget about gender boundaries right now, if it was not allowed for male-female or for a person to make wudu next to somebody else, then that would have been specified, right? It would have been made clear. So when the gender boundaries came, what it's telling us isn't that a husband and wife cannot make wudu together. It is, or maybe an aunt and her nephew, a brother and sister. It's saying that awrah needs to be observed, and you shouldn't expose your awrah in a place where the opposite gender can see. And a man shouldn't be in a place where it's known that women, remove their awrah, right? Or they might expose their awrah for whatever reason. But what remains is if there's mahram, if it's a mahram relationship between the male and the female, then they can make wudu together, right? So perhaps that's how we understand kind of the chapter title with the hadith that's being mentioned.
That does not explain the second part of the title of the وضوء الرجل مع امرأته. Okay. وفضل وضوء المرأة. وين هذا فضل وضوء المرأة؟
I don't have that. In my book is just wudu al-rajul ma'a imra'atihi.
Okay.
Now, what you're seeing is a man is allowed to make wudu from the remaining water that his wife or sister, whoever used from wudu. We could take this from other hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ and his wife would make ghusl from the same source of water, right? All right. باب صب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وضوءه على المغمى عليه. The chapter about the Prophet ﷺ pouring water he made wudu with on somebody who has fainted. عن جابر رضي الله تعالى عنه قال جاء رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعودني وأنا مريض لا أعقل فتوضأ وصب علي من وضوئه فعقلت فقلت يا رسول الله لمن الميراث إنما يرثني كلالة فنزلت آية الفرائض. So here Jabir radiallahu ta'ala an says that the Prophet came to me to visit me while I was sick, and his sickness was pretty severe to the extent that he would lose consciousness. So the Prophet ﷺ took water that he made wudu from and he poured it on this man, this companion radiallahu ta'ala an. And he says that when the Prophet did that, I regained consciousness. So once again, is this out of barakah? Possibly, right? Or is it simply because if somebody is, losing consciousness, they're falling asleep, for example, you put water on them, what happens? They wake up, right? So is it this or this? It could be either. So why do I say that? I say that because at least those who want to try and amplify or exaggerate this whole tabarruk bin Nabi, alayhi salatu wasalam, getting barakah from the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, they cannot take things like this and use it as clear evidence. It's not clear evidence. Because putting water on somebody while they are kind of in and out is very normal. If I were to take water and do that to someone, it's expected, or it's not strange for that person to kind of wake up, right? That's all I'm saying. And then this man asked about inheritance, and no need to get into those details. It's important? Then send me an email.
So it's going from wudu, making wudu to inheritance.
Well, he thought he was going to die. Right? If it's Jabir bin Abdullah, he lives, but he thought he was going to die. So he said, Rasulullah, how do I deal with this? This is how they used to think. I'm not going to meet Allah while having neglected an obligation, especially something like inheritance, where so many people play around with it. All right. باب الغسل والوضوء في المخضب عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال حضرت الصلاة فقام من كان قريبا من المسجد فبقي قوم فأتي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بمخضب من حجارة فيه ماء فصغر المخضب أن يبسط فيه كفه فتوضأ القوم كلهم قيل كم كنتم قال 80 وزيادة. So here Salah came and they started Salah. Those who were near to the masjid, attended Salah, and others stayed behind. So the Prophet ﷺ, why did they stay behind? Because they didn't have wudu. They were looking for water, it seems like. So after Salah, the Prophet ﷺ comes with a mikhdab. What is a mikhdab? What is it? Okay, so it's a type of technology they had then that they would specifically use for cleaning clothing, right? Whatever that was. Right, so, but in general, it's smaller. You can only fit so much water. In fact, it seems like it's so small that you can't even put your hand in it, right? You see, فَصَغُرَ الْمِخْضَبْ أَنْ يَبْسُطَ فِيهِ كَفَّهُ. Right? The Prophet couldn't even put his hand in it. Anyway, so the Prophet does what he has done before. The barakah of the Prophet ﷺ, or at least what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts as a result of the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, everybody who remained made wudu from that. And so the person narrating the hadith or the incident was asked, how many were you? He said 80 or more than 80. Right? So more than 80 people made wudu from something that is so small you can't even put your hand in it. Alayhi salatu wassalam. عن أبي موسى رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم دعا بقدح فيه ماء فغسل يديه ووجهه فيه ومج فيه. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام brought a qadah. Okay, so the point of this chapter isn't so much the miracle aspect. It is more about what is the container that's being used to hold the water. So the first one we just said was something that they would use for washing clothing. Here you have a qadah. Qadah is like a bucket, right? Maybe from different material, could be made from clay, the other one made for something else, metal, whatever it is. So the Prophet ﷺ made wudu from water that's being contained in a bucket, for the lack of a better word, from a qadah. So he washed his hands, his face, and he washed his mouth as well. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت لما ثقل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم واشتد به وجعه استأذن أزواجه أن يمرض في بيتي فأذن له فخرج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بين رجلين تخط رجلاه في الأرض بين عباس ورجل آخر فكانت عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها تحدث أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال بعدما دخل بيته واشتد وجعه هريق علي من سبع قرب لم تحلل أوكيتهن لعلي أعهد إلى الناس فأجلس في مخضب لحفصة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم طفقنا نصب عليه تلك القرب حتى طفق يشير إلينا أن قد فعلتن ثم خرج إلى الناس عليه الصلاة والسلام. So here Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was in his last days and his illness became very severe, he asked his wives if they are okay with him just spending his last days in the house of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So they accepted that. We'll pause here. So he wanted to spend his last days in the house of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So two men, one of them being his uncle Abbas and someone else, helped him get to Aisha's home. And he asked for a qirab, again another type of vessel, another type of container. What kind? I don't know the exact details. Obviously we don't really use these things anymore. But the idea is, as I said, the point here is whatever can hold water is permissible to use for both non-religious reasons and for religious reasons as well. The only exception to that is that which is made from silver or gold. All right. So he told them to bring water in a container and to kind of pour it on him, probably just to reduce the heat, as is quite normal. When somebody's extremely hot, they'll put water, wet towels on them just to keep the temperature down, to try and reduce some of the pain or whatever the medical terms behind it. So that's the point of this hadith. The next hadith عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم دعا بإناء من ماء. Here إناء is more of what's used to drink from. Right? What's used to drink from. And an ina can be made of different material. Right? It could be made of leather, it could be made of maybe copper, whatever it was. فَأُتِيَ بِقَدَحٍ. Again, a qadah is mentioned here. رَحْرَاحٍ فِيهِ شَيْءٌ مِّن مَاءٍ. What is rahrah? I don't know. It could be the material it's made of. So just as I said, whatever is used in our times to contain water is permissible to use for both personal, non-religious reasons and for religious reasons as well. Today it would be plastic, glass. If the Prophet ﷺ was living in our times today, these hadith would be saying a glass of water. He asked for a glass of water. He asked for a bucket of water. He asked for a hose, for example. He asked for a plastic bottle, whatever it is. فوضع أصابعه فيه قال أنس فجعلت أنظر إلى الماء ينبع من بين أصابعه فحذرت من توضأ ما بين 70 إلى 80. So here, again, you have an incident where the Prophet ﷺ called for water. Water is limited. A lot of people need to make wudu. A lot of people need to drink water. They're thirsty. So the Prophet ﷺ put his hand in the water, and Anas radiallahu ta'ala an says that he saw water coming from the Prophet ﷺ's hand. Right? And he says that I guess about 70 to 80 people made wudu from that water. Right? And this is another point here. If you want to look at it from a technical perspective, the source of that water is what? Where is that water coming from? Right? It's a miracle, right? But aside from that, you just want to look at it from purely a technical perspective. That source of water is quite bizarre. Right? Is it really water? Like if a scientist is looking there and you have like water coming out of somebody's hand, is that H2O? You might look into it. They might take a microscope and start chemically breaking it down. Is it H2O? In the mind of fiqh, it doesn't matter. Does it look like water? Does it taste like water? Is it called water? That's it. That's it. Why do I say this? Because what I see from some students of knowledge today is that they will start to analyze things from the point of chemistry and chemical breakdown. Right? And my question is, does it really go to that extent? I'm asking a question. I'm not saying something I'm not making a definitive statement here. I'm asking the question. Does the Sharia ask us to go to the extent of chemically breaking down substances to determine whether it's halal or haram? Right? So let's be sure before we start exaggerating our research and becoming like those the Prophet ﷺ said, halak al-mutanatti'un. People who over-research things, they go beyond what the Sharia is asking them, will find their demise. Right? There's no need to make everything so difficult unless Allah is telling us to. If Allah is telling us to, fine. Right? But is this water that's coming out of the Prophet's hand, ﷺ, do we need to chemically break it down to determine it's H2O? That's all I'm saying. I'm asking this question, and I'll leave it up to the students of knowledge to really contemplate that. But we'll stop here, inshallah, at hadith number 152. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.